Intro: The Price of Innocence. In 1959, Elvis Presley was 24 years old, already the most famous musician on earth. He had money, mansions, platinum records, millions of women wanted him, most of them screamed. But the girl who changed his life didn't. She was 14. Her name was Priscilla Beaulieu, the daughter of a U.S. Air Force officer stationed in West Germany. Elvis met her at a modest military party on a quiet night. She wore a navy blue dress and barely spoke. He was still grieving his mother, still adjusting to life outside the American spotlight. And when he looked at her, he saw something he hadn't seen in years: silence, obedience, simplicity. He kept her close, called her often, and eventually asked her parents if she could move in with him at Graceland before she turned 18. To the outside world, it seemed like a love story. But inside the gates of Elvis's mansion, it was something else. This is the story of how the most powerful man in music built a life with a teenage girl. Shaped her, isolated her, controlled her. Then watched her walk away. It's not just about fame. It's not just about love. It's about the illusion of devotion. And the cost of turning a young girl into an icon's private dream. Part 1. He met her. She was 14. Elvis Presley arrived in Friedberg, West Germany in October 1958 as part of his U.S. Army draft. He didn't want to be there. His career was peaking. His mother had just died. And though he was technically a soldier, he wasn't living in the barracks. Elvis rented a private home outside the base. He traveled with an entourage of close friends and bodyguards. He had a private cook, a private driver, and stacks of fan mail arriving daily from America. But none of it seemed to matter. Friends described him during that time as restless, withdrawn, mourning. One night in late 1959, a fellow serviceman invited him to a small off-base party. Mostly officers, some spouses, nothing extravagant. Elvis showed up anyway. He was polite, quiet, observing, and then he saw her. Priscilla Beaulieu was the stepdaughter of Captain Paul Beaulieu, an Air Force officer assigned to Wiesbaden. She wasn't supposed to be at the party, too young, but someone brought her anyway. Maybe they thought it would impress Elvis. She sat quietly in the corner, sipping a soda. No screaming, no fawning, no makeup. He walked over. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, you're Elvis Presley." "Do you like my music?" "I guess. My dad listens to it more than I do." It wasn't flirtation. It was fascination. According to Priscilla, what followed was unexpected. He asked about her school, her family, her favorite movies. She said he never touched her. Never made her feel unsafe, but he did ask to see her again, and she said yes. In the weeks that followed, Elvis invited her to his house multiple times, always with chaperones, always early curfews. He'd play the piano for her. They'd talk about books, about his mother, about loneliness, but he was building something. He began telling her what he liked: soft colors, natural beauty, long hair. He complimented her youth and how quiet she was. He said she reminded him of how girls used to be. Behind the charm, there was something else taking shape. An image, a mold, a role. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a presence that would stay when the applause stopped. By early 1960, Elvis's military service ended. He returned to the U.S. The fans were waiting. The tour resumed. And Priscilla, she stayed behind and waited. At 15, she was now in high school, fielding whispered rumors about her relationship with Elvis. But it wasn't just gossip. He kept calling, sending letters, requesting photos, promising things. And when she turned 17, he did something extraordinary. He asked her parents to let her move to Memphis, to Graceland. It wasn't framed as romantic. It was for her education, he said. Better schools, a stable environment. He promised they'd live separately with housekeepers and chaperones. He told her father that nothing inappropriate would happen, and somehow they agreed. In 1963, Priscilla moved into the most famous mansion in America. She thought she was entering a fairy tale. She didn't know. She was stepping into a performance. Part 2, The Mansion and the Rules. In 1963, Priscilla Beaulieu stepped through the gates of Graceland, the white-columned palace that fans around the world called Elvis's kingdom. She was 17, legally still a child, moving 5,000 miles away from her family to live with a man who hadn't gone a week without media attention in 5 years. To the outside world, it seemed like a dream. For her, it was more like entering a world without clocks, because nothing at Graceland followed normal rules. The house was grand but not cold. There were shag carpets, leather couches, gold-plated details. There were cooks, cleaners, bodyguards, and hangers-on who came and went. And in the center of it all, Elvis. He called her baby. Told her she didn't need to worry about anything anymore. Said he'd take care of everything, her clothes, her schooling, her hair appointments. And he meant it. From the beginning, Elvis insisted on control. He told her what to wear, which friends were acceptable, what movies she could see, what books were too modern. She wasn't allowed to go out at night, wasn't allowed to leave Graceland without permission, wasn't even allowed to work. On paper, she was finishing high school. In reality, she was being sculpted slowly, methodically, into the woman Elvis had imagined years earlier. Long hair, soft voice, no opinions too loud. She later described it as a kind of quiet training. He wanted me to be perfect, she said. He wanted me to be the girl he dreamed of, and I wanted to be that girl. For a while it worked. He would shower her with gifts, custom outfits, perfume, jewelry. He'd let her watch him record music, rehearse dance steps, flirt with the idea of marriage. But only on his terms, always on his time. Some days he'd be warm, tender, funny. Other days he'd disappear, sometimes for days, and return with no explanation. She was told not to ask, because this was Graceland, and Graceland had rules. One of those rules was distance. Despite living together, Priscilla wasn't allowed to sleep in Elvis's bed. They lived in separate quarters, out of respect, he said, but it created tension. She had moved across the world for him. She was sacrificing her youth, her independence, her sense of self, but she still wasn't fully his. At least not yet. There were rumors about other women, about Vegas showgirls, about co-stars on movie sets. Priscilla didn't know what was true. She only knew what she saw: tabloid headlines, late-night phone calls, sudden mood swings, and then apologies, always followed by gifts. To Elvis, control wasn't cruelty, it was safety. He had risen from a shotgun house in Mississippi to become the most famous man in the world. And along the way, he had learned one thing: fame takes everything, unless you hold it tight. So he held Priscilla tight, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with silence, always with power. As she turned 18, the questions grew sharper. Was this a relationship, a mentorship, a performance? She rarely saw her family. She couldn't walk outside without someone photographing her. She didn't have a driver's license. She didn't have privacy, but she still believed in the promise. He said he loved her. He called her his queen. He said they'd get married one day. And when you're 18, waiting one more year feels like nothing. So she waited. In 1966, after nearly 7 years of courtship, Elvis finally proposed. The ring was beautiful, 3.5 carats, brilliant cut diamond. The wedding in 1967 was a press sensation. A Las Vegas ceremony with celebrities, champagne, and a carefully choreographed media rollout. To the world, they looked perfect. America's king had found his queen, but behind the flashbulbs, something was already fading. Because Elvis wasn't a man who wanted marriage. He wanted mythology. And Priscilla, now in her 20s, married and soon to be a mother, was beginning to ask the question that would change everything. What do I want? Clapperboard Part 3, The Girl Who Became a Wife. She had waited 7 years to become his wife. Now, in May of 1967, Priscilla Presley stood beside Elvis at the altar in a designer lace gown, wearing the perfect smile. Las Vegas cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name for the first time. To the public, she had arrived. She was no longer the quiet teenager in the corner. She was Mrs. Elvis Presley. But what no one saw, what even she didn't fully understand yet, was this: she had not escaped the role. She had simply been promoted inside it. The wedding lasted 8 minutes. A private breakfast followed with powdered donuts and champagne, then a press conference, then photos, then silence. Back at Graceland, nothing had changed. There was no honeymoon in the traditional sense, no time alone. Elvis had movie commitments, studio rehearsals, business deals. Priscilla returned to the same routines, the same rooms, the same curfews, only now with a new last name. And 4 months later, she was pregnant. For most couples, that would be a joyful turning point. For Priscilla, it marked the beginning of something she hadn't expected: distance. Elvis had always spoken about fatherhood as a dream. But now that it was real, he seemed distracted, restless. He was on the road more, less affectionate, more protective, and yet emotionally unreachable. Some biographers suggest he struggled with the idea of a mother figure being sexually desirable. That once Priscilla became pregnant, something shifted in how he saw her, and she felt it. He stopped touching her the same way, stopped looking at her the same way. Their daughter, Lisa Marie, was born in February 1968. Elvis was present at the hospital, smiling, proud, pacing. He held his baby with wonder, but the moment passed quickly. Within weeks, he was gone again, filming, performing, appearing on TV. And Priscilla was left in the nursery, nursing a child. While trying to hold together a version of herself that no longer felt real, the pressure was mounting. She had to be the perfect mother, the elegant wife, the public figure. The invisible presence in a house full of Elvis's entourage, many of whom still saw her as the girl from Germany. She wasn't allowed to appear vulnerable, not to him, not to the fans, not even to herself. In interviews, she would later say, "I was lost. I didn't know who I was outside of Elvis. I didn't know how to make decisions. I didn't know what I liked. I only knew what he liked." That's not love, that's conditioning. Behind the scenes, Elvis's world was also changing. The 1968 comeback special had revived his music career, but it had also reminded him of what he'd lost: youth, spontaneity, raw hunger. He started chasing it again: younger women, new faces, temporary highs. Priscilla was no longer the untouched ideal he had discovered at 14. She was now a wife, a mother, a woman with opinions, moods, questions. And Elvis didn't handle questions well. Their communication broke down. He would leave for days, sometimes weeks, with no clear explanation. When he returned, it was always charming at first: flowers, gifts, music. But the silence always came back. He began using prescription pills, sleeping odd hours, waking up in a fog. He was still the king, but the palace was crumbling. Priscilla, meanwhile, began looking inward. She started practicing karate, partly as exercise, partly as escape. She met new people, had new conversations, and for the first time since she was 14, she began to question the role she was playing. In 1972, after nearly a decade of marriage, she sat across from Elvis at their kitchen table and told him she was leaving. At first, he thought she was joking. Then he got angry. He slammed a chair, stormed out. Said things she would never forget, but she didn't take it back. She packed her things. She took Lisa Marie, and she walked out of Graceland, the girl who had waited 7 years to marry him. Now walked away in silence, not with bitterness, not with drama, just exhaustion. And behind her, Elvis, now 37, watched the only person who had loved him before the myth disappear for good. Part 4, The King Without a Queen. After she left, Graceland felt different. Quieter, colder. Even the rooms Elvis never entered began to feel like they were waiting for someone. But Priscilla wasn't coming back. She had taken their daughter, Lisa Marie, and moved into her own place in Lowe's Angels. And though their separation was civil on paper, amicable, even it left a hole that Elvis never learned to live with. At first, he pretended nothing had changed. The entourage stayed the same. The parties continued. The phones kept ringing. But something inside him had cracked, because Priscilla wasn't just his wife. She was his constant. The one person who had known him before the comeback specials, before Vegas, before the world called him a god. She had seen the boy inside the man, and now she was gone. Publicly, Elvis looked fine. He was still performing, now headlining in Las Vegas, selling out night after night. He wore custom jumpsuits, glittering rhinestones, silk scarves. He kissed fans in the front row. He threw sweaty towels into the crowd. He smiled. But backstage, he was unraveling. The sleeping pills got stronger, the painkillers heavier. The weight gain more noticeable. His moods swung between charming and volatile. He would talk to Lisa Marie on the phone, sometimes forgetting what day it was, sometimes forgetting she was real. And the people around him, the bodyguards, assistants, old friends, were no longer a circle. They were a moat, keeping him isolated, keeping the truth out, keeping the legend alive. He still loved Priscilla. That much was obvious to everyone. He would talk about her late at night, even after she remarried. He kept a photo of her by his bed. He never let anyone else sit in her old makeup chair. Some nights he would call her not to beg for her back, just to hear her voice. And she always answered, because she still cared. But she didn't come back. In August 1977, Elvis Presley died of cardiac arrest in his Graceland bathroom. He was 42 years old, the official cause heart failure. But the truth was layered: years of prescription drug abuse, untreated depression, unchecked fame. He died alone, and when Priscilla got the call, she didn't scream. She didn't faint, she said, "It was always going to end like this. I just hoped it wouldn't be so soon." Thousands gathered at Graceland for his funeral. Fans wept in the streets. Cameras broadcast the ceremony around the world. But inside the house, in one of the back rooms, Priscilla stood quietly with Lisa Marie. She touched his casket, kissed his forehead, and whispered something no one heard. Some say she forgave him. Some say she said goodbye to the boy she met in Germany, before the costumes, before the drugs, before the world swallowed him whole. She never published a tell-all. She never mocked him. Instead, she became the keeper of his legacy. She fought for Graceland, fought to protect Lisa Marie's inheritance, fought to preserve the version of Elvis the world still wanted to believe in. But privately, she always knew the man was more fragile than the myth and the love story. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a lesson. Part 5, The Girl Who Survived the King. In the years after Elvis Presley's death, the world entered a kind of cultural mourning. Tributes poured in. Radio stations played his music on repeat. Impersonators rose overnight, and Graceland became a shrine. But behind the marble gates, beyond the velvet ropes and gold records, there was someone still quietly carrying the weight of what had happened. Priscilla. She had survived Elvis Presley, and that survival was not easy. For a time, she disappeared from the spotlight. She focused on raising Lisa Marie, on protecting what little normalcy their daughter had left. But the media wouldn't let her vanish. Reporters wanted gossip. Publishers wanted scandal. Everyone wanted the truth about what had really happened behind closed doors. And for years, she said nothing, not to protect herself, but to protect him. She knew what the world wanted Elvis to be, and she wasn't ready to break that illusion. Not yet. It wasn't until 1985, 8 years after his death, that she finally told her story. In a memoir titled Elvis and Me, Priscilla opened the door, but she didn't slam it. She wrote with care, with pain, with love, even in the darkest chapters. She described meeting him at 14, moving into Graceland, living under his rules, becoming a mother, and slowly, painfully choosing herself. She didn't portray him as a monster. She portrayed him as a man, lost, sensitive, brilliant, flawed. "He was my first love," she wrote. "But I had to leave to save myself." And for millions of women who read her words, that line hit like lightning. In the decades that followed, Priscilla transformed, from rock star's wife to guardian of a legacy. She turned Graceland into a museum. She fought for Lisa Marie's rights. She helped build Elvis Presley Enterprises into a global brand, not to cash in, but to control the story before it was rewritten by strangers. She appeared in interviews, always poised, always gracious, never cruel, never petty. When asked what Elvis meant to her, she said, "He gave me a life I never could have imagined. But it took me years to understand what it had cost me." In private moments, she still visited his grave, still played his music at home, still told Lisa stories he never got to finish. And when Lisa Marie grew up, she told her daughter, "He loved you in the best way he could. It just wasn't always enough." In many ways, Priscilla carried both his myth and his truth. She knew the fans only wanted the legend. But she had lived with the man, the one who paced in the dark after concerts, who cried when talking about his mother, who held her hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. That man is gone, but the echoes remain. Today, we still talk about Elvis Presley as the king. We remember the jumpsuits, the hips, the records. We celebrate his voice, that impossible, soul-splitting voice. But in the end, his greatest act of love wasn't a song. It was the girl he let go, and the woman who found herself in the silence that followed, ending closing narration plus CTA. She was 14 when she met him, 17 when she left everything behind, 21 when she became his wife, 27 when she walked away, and 32 when she buried him. She never stopped protecting his name, but